Gabby, let's start. Thank you so much for joining. Quick introduction, if you don't mind, and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Gabi Viljoen, currently the head of e-commerce at Nestlé Health Science US, and also co-founder and co-host of Coffee, Commerce, and Cabernet, the podcast.
Awesome. We'll talk about that. What specific brands fit under Nestle Health Science that people know?
Yeah, some of the more popular ones, Vital Proteins. I'm currently drinking a blend of Vital Proteins, Orgain Creatine. I've got Noon electrolytes in here. I've got like a super drink of all of our brands. Garden of Life, Nature's Bounty, Boost. There's a lot more behind those, but maybe some of those are the more recognizable ones.
Okay. That sounds like I need to start my day with that.
I need everything that's for a shortcut. I mean, we could take a handful of pills to keep us healthy as well. I try to put protein in my coffee, collagen in my coffee, and then drink as many of the supplements that are my body is telling me that I need, but I can't take 12 pills twice a day. So,
All right, all the
however
life
I can hack
hacks.
it and shortcut it, I do.
We've just learned all the life hacks in one drink. So, speaking of superpowers or super drinks, what would your team say is your superpower?
Well, what I hope my team would say, no, two areas I think that I do hear consistently. One comes up in a lot of other conversations is I am people first at all junctions, all opportunities that I can be human centric. And where that translates is I can translate, I believe, a strategy or zooming out and what is that big picture into understanding, okay, who are the people that are going to be hands on keyboard? Or that are going to be executing this and bringing that down into something that's hopefully a lot more clear than a lofty strategy up here. So it's that translating strategy into execution, and for me, it's always from a people first lens. It comes up in my conversations when we talk about resourcing, op model builds, team and empowerment. Comes up when we talk about me as a marketer, obsessing over consumers and putting yourselves in their shoes. So I think those are the two areas that without fail, if people are talking about Gabby, they're kind of talking about her angle with when it comes to people, whether it be internally or from a marketing lens.
Amazing. So you also mentioned that you're a co-host of a podcast. I always think it's fascinating when people start their passion projects. So talk a
Yeah.
little bit about the podcast, like why you started it, what it's about.
Yeah, Coffee Commerce Cabernet. We started it. So we, Destiny with Sean and myself, started working together a couple of years ago. I actually followed her on LinkedIn. I was teaching myself hands-on keyboard Amazon advertising back in the day. And we started to work together and we became fast friends very, very quickly because we realized that at the same time that I was going through an explosive career growth, she was as well with her company too. And so we had a lot of behind the scenes conversations about just what it was like stripping away the corporate lingo, being very real with the struggles, new experiences, saying yes when we were scared, new leadership, tough conversations, being the youngest person in a boardroom with C-suite executives on a multi-billion dollar company, like all of those things. And both of us felt like we were struggling to relate to many more people. So we used each other as a sounding board. And so the concept of the podcast for us was the podcast that we wish that we had when we were getting started and bringing some more of these real behind the scenes conversations to life, to light. We've been having conversations about the Enneagram and how that's helped us from a self-awareness perspective, how it's helped transform our leadership journey. We've been having founder interview conversations and mental health came up and how, sort of making sure that you're balancing work-life balance and things that when we were listening to some other podcasts, we weren't getting that as much. So really the summary of it is the podcast we wish we had when we were getting started and the same conversations that helped us just realize we weren't alone in some of this explosive growth that we were having and some of the struggles we were also having at the same time. So hopefully if we could just help one other person that's navigating that, even though you might be admiring someone doing incredible leadership, well-respected career things, they're also figuring it out as they're going along.
The two life hacks. One is the drink that you're drinking, and then two is coffee, commerce, and Cabernet
Yeah.
podcast.
I'm bringing some fun to it, So
Yeah,
we'll pop a new bottle of wine as well. I love wine, not in the snobby way, but we'll open a new bottle of wine. We'll chat about that a little bit, and then we'll get into some real conversations.
amazing. Well, fellow wine drinker over here too. So I've been listening to it and it is awesome. So thanks for doing that and moving industry forward on the podcast. Okay, next question. Let's talk about the industry. You are in one of the most competitive categories online. Talk a little bit about how you're winning, because you are winning, and then also with the chaos of where the industry is at with discovery commerce, retail media, agentic commerce. How do you think about these things?
Yeah, I think how we define what winning looks like. Obviously, certainly when you're in a public company, share and sales growth is a big part of that. But there's so much more behind the scenes that to me is more of the definition of winning. That is building, certainly from my lens, leading e-commerce with building a truly integrated commerce model. So agnostic of where the consumer is shopping, understanding that that consumer is a connected consumer. Your online consumer is your offline consumer, and the retail media they're exposed to online, they're also exposed to in-store retail media and maybe even flyers and app pop-ups and whatnot. And just what to me, it's doing what we can internally to make sure that we aren't shooting ourselves in the foot about having siloed conversations, siloed teams that are maybe trying to solve one part of a consumer's problem, but thinking about how it all comes together. And again, putting yourself in the shoes of that consumer, patient, or caregiver. Um, and then I think that that does trickle down into winning at the end of the day because the experience that someone has looking at a PDP on Amazon is more seamless to them walking into Walmart and picking up a product off of shelf and nothing is disjointed. So, whilst I always feel like there's room for improvement, I think that that mindset that we do have internally does translate. Campaign assets, for example, just being really consistent and not talking at consumers and patients, but talking to them with, ultimately what problems are we trying to solve? Not just talking of the age old, don't talk about features, talk about benefits, but taking that a little bit of a step further. Industry wise, there's so much going on. It can be so easy to be incredibly overwhelmed at new solutions that are coming out that might not even be tried true, partnerships being announced, and what does that impact going to look like in the long term and the medium term. I am just a big fan of when it comes to our team and how we're actioning on things today. It's very much what can we control in the moment as well. You can get very overwhelmed when you think about what might happen in a few months down the line, and that's my job to plan for and my peer set with leaders to plan for. But the folks that are executing, that are hands on keyboard, that are delivering these campaigns, what can they control right now? What can they test? That is, make sure that we're always doing something to do some tests, but never forget the core. Never forget that two-thirds of our consumers are still shopping in store as well, even though e-commerce might be 30%, but explosive growth. Well, we still have to serve the reality of today. And oftentimes I hear this conversation about what is coming next and ignoring a little bit about the today, and that it is for us still the majority. I think making sure that I and my team are focusing on fewer, higher impact priorities. That's a basic thing that people say, but do actions speak louder than words? Do they follow through with that? So that's often something that I'm reminding myself and reminding my team as well. And then anchoring everything on the consumer, anchoring everything on why we're doing what we're doing, and that takes out a lot of the fluff as well. If think about agentic commerce, and I think about how Amazon and Rufus are trying to get into that, and Walmart and Sparky as well. Start paying attention to what consumers and people are actually doing, and not what we think they might be doing too. That
Hmm.
takes a lot of the noise out of it sometimes.
Yeah. You talk a little bit about breaking down the silos. Are you organizationally able to break down silos because you're organized in a way that does that? How does that work?
We could probably do 2 hours on this one topic when we talk about teams and op models and whatnot. Combination of op model of teams. So 3 years ago, I led e-commerce, reported directly to our CEO as its own function. Sometimes I see e-commerce sit in marketing. Sometimes I see it sit in sales. Viral Shah is the president of sales at Nestlé Health Science US. And so what we did a couple of years ago, I think it was about a year and a half or so ago, we moved e-commerce into sales. And that has been incredibly helpful to integrate the e-commerce mindset into a lot of the traditional retailer teams as well, the brick and mortar teams. And I think that that is a combination then of mindset, skill sharing, and org structure change. I don't think it'll ever be a perfect blend, but I do think that organizations, leaders could do a better job of really obsessing over the incentives that they give to their
Mhm.
teams, what bonus structures look like, how do you hit that, and making sure that it's never at a win for one team is never at a loss for another team, or
Mhm.
understanding if that is true and that is the right decision to make for a business, for a brand to hit a collective goal, that that is really clear, because otherwise you do end up compounding this us versus them within one internal team, which is entirely avoidable to me, but absolutely happens.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, you've got so many challenges that you're up against in terms of changing consumer behavior, but you're really kind of prioritizing and focusing on the right things. What would you say is the biggest challenge you're navigating in your role specifically right now? And is it part of a broader e-commerce shift?
Yeah, look, I think it is this not dissimilar to the industry question of how do we manage and prioritize. I think the biggest challenge right now is the complexity, the pace of things moving, and then what can we control with that? You can't continually restructure an organization to move with the pace of change. So that's not, you can do it over time, but not every other month or every 6 months as there's a new shift in agentic commerce. Okay, are we making sure that the digital teams are fully integrated into the sales teams? That might not be realistic, you know. So I think it's really understanding that there is a lot when it comes to the pace of change. It is explosive right now. When I got into e-commerce, I knew that this was, I mean, this the rate of change was why I wanted to get into e-commerce. Never did I think it would be as overwhelming as it is right now. And I don't think that that's going away anytime soon. But I don't see it as a problem or a challenge so much as just another shift and a different way of working. I try to train my team and have conversations with folks in the industry about constantly being curious and constantly being agile. And I think those are the two foundational habits that got me interested in e-commerce at the end of the day. I never wanted to be a cog in the wheel. I never wanted to do the same thing every day. And sometimes I would like to be bored, but that is not the reality, I think, in our industry. And so for me, it's not a challenge, more so it's just a mindset shift of these things are going to continue happening around us. What do we need to do as a team and even as an individual to process all the information and try and figure out, okay, what can we action on right now? And what do we need to plan for as well for the future, but never one at the expense of the other.
Hmm. I mean, you basically answered the next question, which is for people looking to achieve what you've achieved in your career growth. What are the skills that you think they should have if they're looking to have that head job? And you mentioned curiosity.
Yeah, for sure, curiosity. And I'm an antsy person by nature. My brain is constantly thinking about things, so I think that that lends into agility. But probably outside of what I've already said, I do advise, and this is often a when I have mentor-mentee conversations, I do advise to make sure that people always understand the why behind something, because then that helps them to zoom out a little bit more, helps them to understand that big picture, and then ultimately get to a stage where they could make that same call themselves, even if they are, just starting to break into the industry. If they are, I mean, I'll have these conversations with college students, always always thinking about when you're getting advice, feedback, recommendations, coaching or anything like that, or just a decision is made organizationally that is not what you would have done, understanding the why,
Mm.
because then there's often a good reason for it. Leaders don't always communicate the good reason, but that puts you in the position to then understand what are all of the other inputs that may have gone into, oh, they went into a different direction from my recommendation because this, and here's how I could control something and change it for next time. Or here's why I was so focused on my siloed part of a task that leads into a broader project, and I might have to go in a slightly different direction that maybe adds an extra hour to my work week, but I understand for the collective, that's a better decision. So for leaders, they should always be doing their best to communicate the why behind something, especially if you're going in a different direction. But as an piece of advice for folks getting into the industry, things move at such great speed. I think that this is advice, period, in life, but make sure that you can do your best to understand the why behind something.
Well, something else that you have a lot of experience with is speaking on stage. And I have a lot of people that come and ask me this question. So asking you, what are your tips and tricks for preparing to speak on panels or on stage?
Well, say yes, scared.
Hmm.
My first experience on stage was speaking on Amazon's Accelerate stage, and that was quite a big one to be first large live audience. Um, I had that Destiny signed me up, and she didn't really give me an opportunity to say no. So that definitely kicked me in the butt a little bit, and just made me do it and not allowed my ego to overstress about it. And since then, I think. No one ever knows what you're going to say next. And so for some people, they like to script things. I don't really love to script things because I will not remember it when it comes down to it. I just sort of like to remember what are the key points, what's the overarching narrative, the storyline, and then what are the key points with it. But I often find both in myself and when I've had conversations with other people as well, if you do try to overscript it, especially if you're live in that moment, it can stress you out. Oh, I missed a section, and that ends up being more stressful, but no one knows what you're going to say next other than the teleprompter. I will say sometimes on an Amazon stage when they're quite particular about certain language that you can and cannot
Yeah.
say that might be different to some of your natural language. I will prep beforehand and make sure that I don't use certain terminology, but anchoring it to, 2 to 3 things that you want to be remembered, not overcomplicating it, and always just bringing back to what's the storyline of this. Saying yes, scared, and don't overscript yourself.
Last question, which is, are there other podcasts besides your own or books or LinkedIn Voices? How do you learn? How do you keep up with your curiosity?
Yeah, I love learning from LinkedIn. I always have, even when it came down to technical course type stuff that was hands-on keyboard all the way up to thought leadership. I love the pace of LinkedIn, if you will, because things do continue to keep changing. And so I can kind of see some common threads from different people, or I can see different perspectives on the same new announcement or partnership. And so I do love that with LinkedIn. Of course, love to listen to the CPG guys because in my role right now with CPG, this has been a big shift for me. I started my early career was with digitally native brands that worked with great speed, sometimes maybe not always the same level of due diligence. Well, you don't have that luxury or opportunity when you're with Nestle or when you're in large CPG. And so I had to have quite a mindset shift from more tactical things, I suppose, into larger CPG approaches. And so that was a big, I'd say, over the last 3, 4 years, that was a big shift for me is to spend some time listening to the conversations that they were having there. But really just following a couple of different folks on LinkedIn to be able to get different perspectives on the same announcement has been that gives me a well-rounded view of the pros and cons of something and not just listen to or read a PR press release to
Mhm.
stay up to date with what's coming out in the industry. So that's been helpful for me from day one of learning e-commerce, and it's still helpful with a very different mindset of why I'm going to LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of your insight. It's been great to watch your career explode from my perspective and also the brands that you've been managing. So I will see you at the next stage, I'm sure.
Absolutely, we will do. Awesome. Thank you, Melissa.
Great.